Good morning. Today we are going to speak about lyric poetry. Lyric poetry. This is something that is going to be repeated over and over through our literature course. And lyricism is a quality that is proper of poetry that we are going to encounter over and over again. What does lyricism entail? It means the expression of feelings. And that is what is mostly particular and singular about this period of our history of literature. However, once this comes into history of literature, once this enters the scene, this is not something that we can remove from the history of literature. So we are going to find that lyricism will appear and reappear in different forms, but nonetheless, lyricism is going to be there. And a very clear example is what we will have in the 1800s with the Romantic movement, because they all refer to their feelings. So what is momentous, what is particular, and what is exciting about this period of Greek literature is the expression of feelings. I had already spoken a little about Hesiod, right? And we saw how his legacy was to bequeath to the history of literature a literary persona. So after Hesiod, we have somebody who actually speaks about himself. However, Hesiod doesn't speak about his feelings. He speaks about his life, but not about his feelings. So we are taking things a step further. We are taking things to the expression of one's feelings, to begin with. Second, the importance of the first person, I, ego in Greek. With Hesiod, and a lot more with Homer, but let's stop at Hesiod now. Let's look at Hesiod. With Hesiod, we find someone who thinks to be inspired by the muse. So the muses are inspiring me, and I am just a mere servant, a mere minister of the muses. I regard myself as a conduit for the inspiration that comes through me from the muse. Do you see this? So I am not expressing my own self. I might speak about my life, but I am not speaking about myself, much less about my feelings. I am just a mere conduit for the muse to express this beautiful poem, and what happened in the Theogony, and what happens in the Works and the Days. Instead, now we have this shift. I would even dare to call it a revolution. This is not something that you can find in literary studies, but let me use the expression a Sapphic revolution. Sapphic revolution in honor of the Greek poet Sappho. There you have her name. Okay, you have her name in Greek and you have her name in English. Why is this a revolution? Because it is a major shift in ideals. And not only in ideals, but also in the way things are written. So I'm going to start by listing some of the major traits of lyric poetry, and then I'm going to focus on the person of Sappho and her work. So one of the major traits of lyric poetry is that now we have poets singing, not only reciting, with a lyre. It's a musical instrument, and you have it right there. So you see, that's that musical instrument that they use to accompany their poems. That's the first shift that we have. Epos means word. Instead, lyric comes from lyrikos, which means that which is sung along with a lyre. We have this shift. We have this innovation in poetry. Then we have also a major shift in ideals. Eventually we will see how some of the Greek poets write poems about them fleeing from the battlefield and relinquishing their shield. That would have been a great dishonor during the Homeric period, you see, where bravery and courage were regarded as the greatest ideals. Now they despise those ideals and shift towards some other ideals. Above all, the ideal of feelings. And when I say feelings, of course we can have very beautiful and noble feelings like the appreciation of beauty and love itself. Nonetheless, not all lyrical poets are going to stand on the same line. Some of them are going to speak about feelings like hatred. Okay, Archilochus of Paros, for example, has been surnamed the Scorpion because of how harsh he can be with his use of the written word. And there are very interesting legends about him. And I think I'm going to come to him next session when we spoke more in detail about him. There are also some other feelings like the feelings you will experience at a party, or the feelings that you will experience with wine, especially that is what we find in Anacreon of Tales. And now I will focus especially on Sappho's love for beauty. That is what I call a Sapphic revolution. But before I delve into her love for beauty, there's another major shift, and you see that in in Homer's times and in Hesiod's times, poetry and literature as we know it was transmitted always through the same metrical pattern. I've spoken about it already, the dactylic hexameter, which means 6 beats, right? And you have here, for example, the beginning of the Odyssey. Andramoi enepe musa politropon haos malapola. So you have 6 beats in each line. Planche peitro ies hieron toliethrone persen. Polon danthropon irenaste akaino negno. Pola dogen ponto pacen algean katathimon. Arnimenos entepsi gen kainos tonetairon. The question here is, how many syllables do we have in each line? It varies, because what matters is to have those beats. Instead, now we're going to start something that is called isosyllabism. You have the word written right there, okay? Isosyllabism. And now we will count the syllables that we use in each line. And that is a major shift, and actually most of the poetry that we know in our days is isosyllabic. Hoi men hipe onstroton hoi de pesdon hoi de naun faisemen epigan melainai emmenai calistone gedeken hototi seratai. What do we have here? 11, 11, 11, and 5. And that is called the Sapphic stanza, in honor of Sappho of Lesbos, who is the one who came up with this marvelous idea, and it's definitely a major part of her legacy, the Sapphic stanza, which is going to be reused by Greek poets, but especially by Latin poets like Catullus and Horace. Okay, Horace. And then it's going to be taken, it's going to be used also in the liturgy, and it's going to be used in Spanish poetry like Becker and Unamuno, and even in some pop songs. I'm going to come to that. Okay. Yes.
Does isosyllabism mean the use of 11 syllables or just the syllable?
That's a good question. Isosyllabism, which is a common trait of lyric poetry, means that now we're going to count the number of syllables. Okay? So if you want to create a Sapphic stanza, you have to count 11, 11, 11, 5. And she's always going to follow that pattern. 11, 11, 11, 5. But that's not the only one. For example, the alcaic stanza is going to be 10 tomen garenzat gimakilin detai 11 so 9 ne ifore methasim melaina 10. Okay, so that's the common pattern that he's going to use. And again, that alcaic stanza is going to be reused in Latin poetry, especially by Horace. So we find different types of stanzas, and that's also something very interesting about this movement, because before this we only had the dactylic hexameter, and now we are exploring new techniques, and we can have the alcaic stanza, we can have the Sapphic stanza. Those are the two most common ones, and we're going to focus on the Sapphic stanza. But we also have the iambic beat, which is a lot simpler than the dactylic beat. So if you come up with an iambic hexameter, that means that we are going to have 6 beats, but instead of making them as long as Homer, we're just going to have a short and a long one, a short and a long one, a short and a long one. An iambic hexameter. Otegna kadmutu palainea trophe. So it is just a simple beat with 12 syllables. In Anacreon, we find also the use of iambic poetry, but most of the time it's going to be a trimeter. So we're going to use 3. Dotemoi liren homeru, thonies aneute hordes, and so on. Dotemoi kypela tesmon, dotemoi nomus gerasas. So we're using a short and a long, a short and a long, a short and a long. Okay, that is what I'm referring to with isosyllabism. Okay, Sappho. She, of course, it's difficult to name a precise date of birth, but it's estimated that she must have been born sometime around 630 BC, and she died probably sometime around 570 BC in the city of Militeni, in the island of Lesbos. By the way, Aristotle also spent some time there, maybe like 300 years after Sappho, studying sea animals. But I close the parentheses now. Okay, Sappho, tradition has called Sappho the 10th muse. You remember that in Hesiod's writing we had 9 muses. So her poetry has been so appreciated that some have said that Sappho is the 10th muse. Some other times you will find that surname used for Sister Juana Inés de la Cruz, but really the first one to have that title attached to herself, the 10th muse, was Sappho, Sappho of Lesbos. She was born to a wealthy family in Lesbos, and when she was 11, her father died. And she met the poet Alceus, and he dedicates one of his poems to her, and he describes her with violet hair and a honey smile. That's a very interesting thing, because maybe the names for colors in ancient Greece were not the same names we have in our days. Think of Homer. Of course, the most common color in Homer is black, followed by red. Those are the most common colors that you find in Homer. How many times does he speak about blue? Never. Homer doesn't speak about the color blue. And when he describes the sea, How does he describe the sea? Wine-like. What color is wine? It's purplish. So why does he say that the sea is wine-like? And when he speaks about the sky, what does Homer say? Iron-like. So that's some kind of gray. So I don't think it's completely disparaged to have Alcéus speaking about Sappho with violet hair. It's not like she was some kind of Martian. No, it's just the way colors were named back then.